Have you ever wondered what goes into writing a compelling narrative? Let's take a closer look. Welcome back to Otaku Daikun! I've been watching anime for over 20 years now, starting with the likes of Totoro and Sailor Moon. In that time, I've come across all sorts of brilliant anime, and I've made it my goal to investigate the various aspects that make them so appealing. To that end, I'm not trying to dictate for you what shows are inherently better than others. Rather, understanding these mechanics will help you better appreciate what you personally look for in an anime, why you like it, and how you can recognize other anime that have those same qualities. If this video does well, I'll be continuing it as a series. If not, well, at least I tried. Today, we'll be starting off with narrative. A lot of times, I'll watch any anime so long as it's pretty. Most of the 80s and 90s shows I cherish to this day are special for their art style, but writing and narrative present an equally important way to attract viewers. This means we've got to ask the question, what makes a good story? Well, you could go the academic route and learn about traditional narrative structure, the basic graph presenting conflict, rising action, climax, and resolution, or the 3-act structure of most Hollywood movies, but personally, I find those to be too rigid. Not to say these formulas create bad stories, it's just that anime and its often long-running episodic nature doesn't always conform to these standards. To remedy that, I'll be presenting my own way of analyzing narrative that is more flexible and applicable to even the most bizarre series, from the straightforward ones like Death Note to more obscure titles like Serial Experiments Lain. The first 3 videos of this anime appreciation series will cover the critical aspects of creating and recognizing an engaging narrative. Admittedly, it's hard to talk about anime stories without spoilers. In this video specifically, I'll be mentioning potential spoilers to Death Note, The Promised Neverland Season 1, Cowboy Bebop, Full Metal Alchemist, Fate/stay night, and Serial Experiments Lain. I don't think it's anything to get too worked up about, but you may find it worthwhile to watch these anime prior to this video. Starting out, here are some questions for you to consider. Without looking at the visuals or listening to the audio, what makes you actually care about the characters, especially early on before you get to fully understand them? What is it that makes you want to keep on watching, especially when an episode ends on a cliffhanger? I believe the answer lies within 2 key components, an intriguing premise that leads into a major dramatic question. With just these, you should be able to look at any anime at any time within it and understand what about the story both grabs you and keeps you hooked. On a more traditional level, it would be fair to equate these to a story setup and conflict, but again, I find those terms restrictive. That said, it may be helpful for you to draw this comparison. So what is a premise? It's the general idea or concept of a story. Within just a couple of sentences or statements, the premise should communicate to audiences what kind of experience they're in for. These would often be the same statements you'd use to try and describe an anime to your friends, perhaps even to entice them into watching it. The premise, just like a setup, generally identifies the initial who, what, when, where, why, and how type questions needed to step into an anime's narrative world, but also gives a hint of what viewers can expect going forward. Examples honestly do a better job explaining it. For instance, the premise of Death Note is Light Yagami, the son of a Japanese police chief, comes across a mysterious book called the Death Note, which kills anyone whose name is written within. Frustrated by the insufficient justice in society, Light uses the note to kill criminals, but quickly finds himself wanted by the police, who employ a genius detective known only as L. Turns out this can be condensed even further. A young man gets his hands on a book that can kill people. He uses it to punish criminals, while at the same time avoids detection by the police. Right from that, you can jump into the series and get what's going on a fundamental level. Another example would be The Promised Neverland. Emma and her friends grow up in an orphanage called Grace Field under the guidance of their caretaker Isabella. They enjoy their life until discovering that their orphanage is actually a farm, raising children to be eaten by a mysterious race of demons. Not only that, but Isabella is in on it. Emma and her friends plan to escape from the field, but must do so undetected. Again, this can be condensed even further. A group of children try to escape after discovering that their orphanage is secretly a farm for growing kids into demon food. If they hope to succeed, they must outsmart their mama, Isabella. In reverse, you can often recognize an anime by its premise. For example, 2 brothers join the military to learn more about alchemy, so they can get back the bodies they lost as children trying to revive their dead mother. Obviously, the word alchemy gives it away. This is Full Metal Alchemist, but the point in mentioning it is to show that this premise is more or less the same throughout the entire anime, and many people will immediately recognize it. The key to quality is making sure that the premise is intriguing. It should inspire curiosity from the viewer and allow them to emotionally invest in the outcome or experience. But how does one do this? The premises that do it best have elements that are familiar alongside elements that are extraordinary. Essentially, we become invested in things that are exciting and unique, but we also get turned away if there's nothing we can ground ourselves to. The relatable part is arguably the easiest to achieve. While we as people each have different interests, experiences, traumas, and passions, there are some basic human elements that we can find common ground upon. We may not all know how to wield a sword, for instance, but we can definitely relate to someone trying to protect a loved one from harm. The easiest example for this channel would be Shiro in Fate Stay Night. While he is technically a mage, and has an idea of what magecraft is, he's far from indoctrinated into that culture, making him the perfect vessel through which we can learn about the Grail War. Rather than worrying about complicated stuff like the Root or Heaven's Feel, Shiro is concerned about preventing a disaster like the fire that orphaned him 10 years prior, and that concern is more universally human. As for the extraordinary, that can be trickier. It's not as simple as just cramming in all sorts of sci-fi or fantasy elements. Those indeed can be extraordinary, but even certain genres can become so overdone that their tropes are no longer that engaging. For instance, an isekai, where the hero chooses a class and levels up. That aspect of the world is no longer out of the ordinary. Rather, the best way to think of the extraordinary is to consider things that demand explanation, things that stick out or don't logically fit in without more context. Someone waiting at the bus stop on their way to work isn't a concept that demands explanation. Our understanding of reality fully accounts for what is occurring. Someone standing at the bus stop in the nude during a thunderstorm, however, now that inspires curiosity. Questions immediately begin to emerge just from that idea alone. Why are they naked? That's not normal. How can they pay for the bus if they have no pockets or purse to keep their wallet? Won't that person be a sanitation hazard when sitting on the bus seat? Will the police arrest them? With Death Note, the book itself is extraordinary. How does a book kill people? Where did it come from? What could people do with it? You blend that with Light, your highly intelligent yet otherwise normal high schooler, and you've created a perfect avenue for welcoming viewers into your story and keeping them curious about potential developments. These questions you begin asking are called dramatic questions, and they naturally emerge when a story introduces elements that contradict our worldly understanding. Eventually, a solid premise will naturally lead to a major dramatic question that encompasses all the others, providing a framework for the rest of the story to follow. Most commonly, it occurs when a protagonist defines what it is they desire and strive toward. For Death Note, the major dramatic question is, will Light be able to outsmart the police and establish his own form of justice? The inverse is also true. Will L be able to arrest Light before his ambitions are achieved? In Promised Neverland, the major dramatic question is, will Emma and her friends be able to escape, or will they be eaten? As for Full Metal Alchemist, the question is, will the brothers get their bodies back? Major dramatic questions are by nature very basic, such as, will the hero save the day, or shall evil triumph? While basic, they stand as the backbone to a decent story, and they suggest what audiences can look forward to discovering if they continue watching. In many ways, a major dramatic question is the same thing as a story's conflict. After all, drama is conflict. We ask the question because we recognize legitimate possibilities in how events could turn out. If someone has a wish, that wish may either come true or not. And aside from the fact that most stories have a happy ending, we have no guarantee how things will turn out, whether through the overall outcome or the various transitions that occur within the story. The reason possibilities exist is because desires are met with opposition, aka conflict. Light wants to use the Death Note, but the police want to arrest him. Emma wants to survive, but the demons want to eat her. A question like, who will win the Grail War, exists because we have various parties all vying for a single prize that only one of them can obtain. Their clashing keeps us curious as to who will live and who will die. Ultimately, when you tune in to watch any of these anime, you're likely doing so because you want to know the answers to its major dramatic question, as well as the many other dramatic questions surrounding it. Boiled down to its essence, this means we continue to watch anime because we have questions we want answered about the story. We're concerned with these answers because there's inherently something unique about the circumstances, something we can't find in real life. Shows that aren't as focused on the story, such as slice of life or comedy anime, also have major dramatic questions. Typically, the question tends to be, what sort of antics are the characters going to get into today? Notably, this question is very weak and hardly engaging. Perhaps the weakest of them all is, what will happen next? Anime with this as their dramatic question rely on means other than narrative to keep them engaging. For a good story, the goal is to have that question be personalized, unique to the story you're trying to tell. Some anime base themselves off a deeper question that's more thematic than narrative in nature. I did mention Serial Experiments Lain, so I'll stick to that one. The premise appears to be, after the suicide of one of her classmates, a naive girl begins learning the ins and outs of computers in the virtual world, reaching a point where the line between reality and the artificial becomes blurry. I think most people watching this show will have the dramatic question, "What the fuck is going on?" And you wouldn't exactly be wrong either. With just a bit more digging, however, that question becomes clearer. What is the nature of reality, and why should we care about it? From a more character-oriented standpoint, that question becomes, will Lain find value in her existence? At the series' end, she confronts these questions and finds meaning in seeing her friends be happy, placing a personal, emotional desire forward as her own truth. Basically, she's in charge of what's important in her life regardless of what others think. Oddly enough, this anime does have a more straightforward lore to it, but you can really only understand it by reading supplemental material, so for the sake of this video, I'm not gonna touch on that. Just know that for some anime, it can be difficult to discern the major dramatic question. For example, let's look at Cowboy Bebop. Out of the entire series, only a handful of episodes actually forward the main narrative. The rest are episodic in nature, featuring a bounty unique to that episode. The premise of the anime is, a crew of misfit bounty hunters in space struggle to make a living while trying to escape their dark pasts. While the structure of the show presents a dramatic question of, what sort of adventure will the Bebop crew have this time? The deeper question ends up being, can the crew, particularly Spike, truly be able to move on from their past? It's a bit tricky since the major dramatic question isn't as apparent at first. By watching the first few episodes, we learn more about the characters. Why are these extremely talented people doing such dangerous work if it hardly pays for food? And who exactly are these weirdos? From a writing standpoint, this is a risky move, but since the creators had the major dramatic question in mind all throughout, audiences are able to uncover it with time, unlocking an even deeper appreciation of the anime. So, to sum all of this up, literally any anime with a decent story has an intriguing premise that leads to a personalized major dramatic question. A premise is intriguing because it contains elements that are both relatable and extraordinary, meaning that we're both invited into the narrative, but also challenged by circumstances that stand out from our comparatively mundane lives. Once hooked, we begin forming all manner of dramatic questions to better understand the world presented to us, culminating in at least one major dramatic question that guides all the others. For you all to practice, pick any anime you please and list its premise in both long and short form, then try to discern the various dramatic questions that keep you invested and see if you can identify the one holding them all together. Sometimes you'll find that an anime is literally just cute characters doing cute things, and their dramatic question is no more than, what cute shit are they gonna do this time? Sometimes you'll find a very compelling narrative that grabs you by the nuts and keeps you glued to the TV until you know how it all turns out. In rarer cases, you'll encounter anime that forego traditional narrative altogether, using the plot as a guise for exploring a more deep and philosophical idea. For the anime that do have solid dramatic questions, it's important to look into how a story goes on to develop and eventually answer those questions. Thus, our next part in this series will cover how to proceed with a story now that the premise and dramatic questions are established. I hope you look forward to it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy this channel, help me beat the algorithm by liking, commenting, and sharing the video, subscribing to Otaku Daikun, and, most of all, smashing that notification bell so you don't miss out on all of my anime discussion, lore, or Let's Play content. If you want to support me directly, there are now 3 ways that all provide the same benefits. You can click join here on YouTube, or join Patreon or Subscribestar for access to exclusive vids and early access. As always, celebrate your fandom.